Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Objective. I'm your host, Jay, and I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to the fourth installment of the Objective series entitled, Is the Alternate Right Wrong? If you're listening on SoundCloud, I just want to first thank you for your time. Time is precious, and it is an honor to share that time with you. I also want to inform you that we have a YouTube channel. It's entitled The Objective Podcast. So just meander over there and give us a subscribe. It would be much appreciated. And I was actually thinking before we get into this topic, having like 10 to 15 minutes for a lot of these topics seems like a very small amount of time. And it's hard to get in depth with each of these topics because a lot of them generate a lot of thought, a lot of questions, just a lot of discussion overall. So one thing I'm thinking of doing is actually having a segment where I take some of the questions that I'm given, because some people have addressed me and they've asked me questions and we're able to sit down and chat. So I want to take some of these questions and actually do a segment where I can answer them, because they may be questions that you have. And also, if you do have a question, feel free to comment them in the YouTube comment box on the videos that relate to your question. All right, so let's get into it, guys. What is the alt-right? So the alt-right is a far-right ideology. If you do look at politics as being on a spectrum, and the conservative views are on the right and the liberal views are on the left, the alternate right are on the far right. Okay, they're not the farthest right. The farthest right is anarchy. The alt-right, they reject mainstream conservatism. Okay, they are white nationalists that essentially want to preserve and protect the white race and culture in the USA. They feel threatened. They feel that their culture is threatened by the influx of all these different cultures and all these different people entering the United States. They feel that that's kind of weakening who they are as a people. Okay, so I went to Breitbart and I was reading an article on the alt-right and how they are perceived, and just basically kind of explaining their views. And one paragraph, it said the alt-right believe that some degree of separation between people is necessary for a culture to be preserved. A mosque next to an English street full of houses bearing the flag of St. George, according to alt-righters, is neither an English street or a Muslim street. Separation is necessary for distinctiveness. So the alt-right is pro-white. That kind of rhymed. And in today's society, this is frowned upon. As a matter of fact, being a straight Christian white cisgender male, I don't know if I said that right. You know what? Actually, I was searching different genders, and there are about 58 that I came up with. We'll do another show on that. But anyways, being a white, straight Christian male in today's society, you are required to be ashamed of your history. You are required to be ashamed of your skin color. If you are to have pride in that, be ready to have a storm of criticism and names such as bigot and racist being thrown at you. I've been approached by some of my Caucasian friends, and they feel that they're kind of they're caught in the crossfire of a racial war that happened hundreds of years ago. They kind of ask, how am I responsible? I look at everyone the same. I don't have prejudice against people, but I feel that I need to hate myself. I feel that I need to be ashamed of myself. What do I do? And actually, Breitbart, in that article that I read, they state that the rise of a group like the alt-right was inevitable in a society where they are beat up for being white, where they are told they should not have pride in that. It was only inevitable that being subject to that for so long, a group like this would emerge. And so I can fairly say that the alt-right movement is a movement that is born from the marginalizing of a particular people. It's the same way that the Black Panther movement was born from the marginalization of another particular group, namely African Americans. And if you go to the core the center of groups like this. Black Lives Matter, some call the New Black Panther movement, the Black Panthers, the KKK, the alt-right. If you go to the core of these groups, you find hatred, anger, and selfishness. So the same way that black folk were devalued members of society before the civil rights movement is the same way that today, being a white male who is Christian and straight, you better shut up. And so it's almost like you're saying, you don't know what it's like to be marginalized. You're privileged. You don't know what it is to be silent. So you sit down and you shut up. Isn't that ironic? Your opinion isn't important, so you need to shut up. You don't know what it's like, so you need to sit down. Very ironic that the same thing that the disenfranchised minority groups in the United States were subject to is what they are now subjecting whites to. Very interesting. And some of you may say, well, this is fair. For the atrocities that our people face, this is fair. And you know what? I do respect your opinion. That's the very least that I can do. I mean, if you can appreciate the tit for tat mentality, then you know what? That's your opinion. You have the right to say it. But what I can't respect is if you consider this progression as a people, as a country, as a society. This is not progression. Don't get it twisted, please. Richard Spencer, the radicalized icon of the alt-right, he was actually giving an interview, or he was being interviewed publicly in the street, and people were asking, "Are you a Nazi?" And he's like, "No, I'm not a Nazi. We actually don't get along with Nazis." They said, "Do you hate black people?" He said, "No." He's like, "Do you like black people?" He said, "Sure." And while he's being interviewed and passerbys were asking him questions like this, a masked man blindsided him and hit him straight in the face. It was more so on the temple. The video's on YouTube. I would implore you to go check it out. Milo Yiannopoulos, I hope I got his name right, the gay conservative and previous editor for Breitbart, was invited to speak at Berkeley, and protesters and rioters began to destroy the campus, even to the point of physically assaulting his supporters. Physically assaulting them. Gavin McInnes, we spoke about him the other day in Let's Talk Headlines. Check that podcast out. Gavin McInnes was invited to NYU to speak, and a bunch of agitators actually entered the hall that he was speaking in and made it so that he could not get his message across by causing a ruckus. And then as he was leaving the facility, the premise, he was pepper sprayed. The only thing that's in the way of mass bloodshed in the streets and violence is for the radical right to actually physically and violently engage the radical left. Because right now, all the violence and agitation and disruption, all of that, the protests, the damage, the violence, that's coming from the radical left. And there's actually a point that I want to make very quickly that we won't be able to go into right now. I actually was brought to awareness of this by Dennis Prager, brilliant man. I also implore you to check out his podcast. He said that the left and the liberals, it is unfair to join and group them into one entity. Okay? The liberals have more in common with Republicans than the left has with liberals. Very interesting thing to consider. We'll talk about that another time. So the question is, coming to an end here, folks, is the alt-right wrong? And my answer is the alt-right, they're misguided and ignorant. They are more of a result than a solution. Their message, I don't like. Their message, I don't think it's moral. But you better believe that I will fight for their right to speak it. Not so much because I care about what they have to say. I mean, don't get it wrong. If they start inciting violence towards African Americans, if they start inciting violence toward other minority groups, then at that point, we as a people need to take a stand. But they can preach their white supremacy all they want. They can talk about how they're superior all they want. They have a right to do that. And the minute we start using violence to shut individuals up who we don't agree with is the minute that we lose as a society, the minute that we start to degenerate into something very scary. When a speech can constitute violence, that's a precedent that we don't want to set. Even though their message may not benefit me or flatter me, the bigger picture is their right to speak it. We're ending here shortly. S.L.A. Marshall. That's Samuel Lyman Atwood Marshall. He was a member of the United States Army since 1917. He achieved the rank of brigadier general and fought in many battles and wars, including the Pancho Villa expedition, World War I, World War II, and finally the Korean War. He was a U.S. Army combat historian, an author, and a journalist. It was noted that some soldiers, quite a large number that would deem it unacceptable, were not shooting to kill the enemy. Some of them would shoot too high. Some of them would shoot noticeably high and purposefully high. And then some of them would blindly fire. And given the purpose of war, this was an obvious issue. So the root of the problem was found to be that while these soldiers were training, they trained on bullseye targets. So you know what a bullseye target is. It's one of those circle. It basically has a circle in the center, and then surrounding that circle are larger circles. And basically your objective is to hit the center of that circle, and that's the bullseye. And you'd be able to gauge your performance based on which one of the outer circles, or how close you were to the center. So they would be training for war on those targets. And not only that, but they would be shooting those targets from about 300 yards out. So shooting a target, a bullseye target, is starkly different from shooting a man, an enemy. And so what Marshall did, he changed the targets to silhouettes. He made it so that no longer are we shooting bullseyes, now we're shooting man-like figures. And instead from 300 yards, it'd be now shooting from 20 to 300 yards. Because at 300 yards, you aren't able to see the distinctive features of a human face. You aren't able to see the expression of a human face. Therefore, when you're in the heat of battle and you need to kill another human, once you've been training on bullseye targets for so long, making that transition is very psychologically taxing. And so now with these new implementations where they're now shooting silhouettes of men, when they were able to go back into war, they can now relate that training to the real world experience. When you make comparisons like, oh, you're a Trump supporter? Well, Trump is a racist. And Hitler was a racist. And Hitler was evil. And evil is deserving of harm or death. In their minds, when they assault and when they shut someone up who's speaking something they don't want to hear, they feel they're doing society a favor. No matter what kind of mental hula hoops they had to jump through to get there, they're there now. And that's why they feel that it is okay to destroy property in rebellion against the right. That's why they feel it's okay to harm people in rebellion against the right. Because in their minds, they have been conditioned, thanks to the media, to make those on the right evil, inhuman. Freedom of speech and freedom of thought are under attack. And people on all sides of the spectrum need to stand up. Because even though today it's not you, tomorrow it may be. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Until we meet again, may it be your objective to be objective. Have a good night.